to have you with us. And this webinar today is a collaboration. It's a webinar led by the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, J-TEC, an institution under the Ministry of Education and Youth Jamaica, in collaboration with the Caribbean Center for Development Administration, popularly known as CARICAD. And today, we are going to be examining the topic of credit accumulation and transfer systems across higher education sectors. And we're looking at best practices and future plans. My name is Dr. Loy Parks. I am the Leadership Development and Institutional Strengthening Specialist with CARICAD. I also wear the hat as the Human Resource Management Association of Jamaica representative on the advisory committee for J-TEC. And this is a topic that is really near and dear to myself and all the esteemed speakers who will be sharing with us. There is a need for us across the Caribbean to be looking at how can we grow our economies? How can we really achieve real socioeconomic development and increase labor market productivity and workplace skills as a part of that aspiration? And as a subset of that, there is a need that we all recognize, a need for transformation around how we across various higher education institutions, how do we develop systems that allow for credit accumulation and transfer systems? And so today, we are going to be exploring that topic in depth. And so I want to share with you a little bit about the persons who are going to be sharing with us. And so our first presenter is going to be Mrs. Norda Seymour Hall. And she's Director, International Relations and Qualifications at J-TEC. She has over 17 years experience in the field of education at various levels. And she has been working assiduously on the implementation of a national qualification framework in the Jamaican context. She has also been working on Jamaica's credit accumulation and transfer credit system. And she's first going to be sharing the paper on that, all right? We will then have some opportunity for questions and answers based on her presentation. And then following her presentation, we're going to have Professor Haldane Johnson. He is the Associate Vice President, you see his title there, of Teaching and Learning at the University of Technology. He has over 40 years experience in the field of education in various capacities. He has served in such institutions such as the Council for Community Colleges of Jamaica. And he is going to be sharing along with Dr. Nanibale Paul. Dr. Paul is Associate Provost, Academic Affairs and University Administration at the Northern Caribbean University. And she has over 35 years in the field of education, not only here locally, but in India as well, where she gained her PhD in the field of education at the University of Pune in India. So we're talking about years and years of experience in the room. And they are both going to be sharing from their institutional perspectives, the best practices, challenges, and future plans for credit accumulation and transfer systems. And so it is my delight to hand over now to Mrs. Seymour Hall. She will be our first presenter. So, my dear Norda, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm just going to share my screen so that I can share with you. Now, credit accumulation and transfer schemes or credit accumulation and transfer systems are very important worldwide. It is important that we are able to monitor, to record, and to reward the passage of persons as they move through courses. We must also be able to facilitate the movement between courses as well as between institutions as far as credits are concerned. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the guidelines and procedures for credit accumulation and transfer within the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica. The objectives of my presentation will be to define the philosophy, the scope, and the goals underpinning a credit accumulation and transfer system for Jamaica, as well as to share JTEC's proposed guidelines for best practices. We'll also be exploring the responsibilities of stakeholders in implementing a credit accumulation and transfer system. Now, what do we know about credit accumulation and transfer systems? Tell me now, true or false, they are a critical component in facilitating lifelong learning. Do we agree? Yes? Okay. Credit accumulation and transfer systems, they are vital for increasing access to the workplace, are they? Yes, they are. I'm sure you'll agree. And institutions that are hesitant to develop learner-friendly CATS policies have no relevance in the 21st century. Do we agree? If anybody disagrees, you can let me know. But I know that most persons will agree with this. Now, why is it important and why now? A credit accumulation and transfer system facilitates learner portability across different pathways and between education sectors, and also between the levels of the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica. And it's vital for lifelong learning. It's vital for recognition. It's vital for articulation agreements and also to facilitate flexible learning pathways. Today's higher education system is defined by fragmentation and complexity, and navigation by learners must be defined by opportunity to integrate learning from different sources that are earned in a variety of contexts at different periods of time and at different levels. We know that persons enter and re-enter our education system, and we must be able to ensure that we are able to monitor what they're doing, we're able to record it, and we are not hesitant to reward their accomplishments. So institutions must, all higher education institutions must allow for credits to be defined by portability in an efficient and transparent manner. Now, the Jamaica Credit Accumulation and Transfer System, it supports the objectives of the NQFJ. And what are those? Qualification, validity, and quality. Learning outcomes-driven education and training, progression paths within and across sectors, recognition of formal, non-formal, and informal learning, cooperation and collaboration among stakeholders. And this is basically our National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica. And we see that we have 8 levels, and we have different learning sectors. Now, each of these sectors, persons should be able to move across them. Persons must be able to move up the levels, and they must be able to do so freely, taking their credits that they've earned at one level to another level. Now, in terms of the scope, the guidelines and procedures that have been developed by the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission apply to all providers of post-secondary education in Jamaica, all qualifications and part qualifications that are assessed and placed on the NQFJ and listed in our Qualifications Registry of Jamaica. And this is so regardless of the delivery mode. And It has a very important purpose at this time. The purpose is to ensure that we have established processes and principles for the resolution of discriminatory or inequitable practices within education and training spheres. What we don't want is for persons to complain that I wasn't treated well, I was discriminated against, my credits were not recognized, there was no opportunity for me to move on, there was no flexible learning pathway for me. We don't want that. We also want to ensure that CATS is positioned within current and accepted flexible learning pathways and articulation practices. It is also critical that when we're designing our qualifications or micro-credentials and so on, we integrate the option for credit accumulation and transfer. Our programs must be designed in such a way that persons can earn credits and they can transfer them. Another purpose is to implement equitable, efficient, and transparent processes for credit transfers and accumulation. Whatever we do, we must be able to ensure that we stand up to scrutiny. We must be able to stand up to scrutiny. And so these guidelines are critical for that. We must also, to continue to ensure that Jamaica makes the progress that it's making, we must facilitate student mobility and qualification portability. Currently, we've learned that our employment rate in Jamaica is almost at 100%, and that is wonderful. We must give our workforce the opportunity to advance themselves so that they can move ahead in high growth areas. We must give our students the opportunity to move around the world and earn and learn as much as they can. And so it is necessary for us to develop a singular and cohesive system for current institutional arrangements. This singular and cohesive system will ensure that we are able to easily matriculate anywhere, and we are able to move seamlessly within our own country as well. And the principles that the guidelines are defined by are as follows: transparency, access, mobility and articulation, learner-centeredness, flexibility, opportunity for appeals. Now we're going to look at some of the guidelines that are involved here. Now, when we think about transparency, it's very important that when we have procedures at higher education institutions for CATS, that those procedures are written. They should also be available ahead of time for persons who are interested in enrolling in programs of study. It's critical that persons know what their options are. And once they know their options and they're able to ask questions, they must be given feedback and clarity of decisions. All of that must be embedded in institutional processes. If decisions are made, then we expect that learners will understand why. That is the hallmark of transparency. Your process must be easy to understand, and it should be very, very clear. Now, it's important that our CAT system is designed for articulation and mobility. And we mentioned before that all qualifications at their design phase must envision CATs. The articulation pathways within the NQFG should be facilitated by institutions as well as awarding bodies. So we do not expect institutions to ignore the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica when they're making their policies, when they're designing their procedures. The qualifications framework must be integral to the CATS process. Mobility through recognition of credit transfer should be facilitated between institutions as well as countries, sectors, and contexts of learning. And that simply means that persons should be should easily be able to move between institutions. They should be able to move seamlessly from TVET to academic studies. They should be able to move seamlessly from London to Japan, wherever it is you want to go in the world, whatever it is you want to do. All institutions should ensure that CAT policies and related procedures are accessible to learners on electronic platforms and within program handbooks. Credit transfer must be facilitated through seamless processes. Now, as it pertains to learner-centered and outcomes-based mapping, this is very critical. Information on all elements of a qualification should be detailed, and we know what those elements are: level, quality, workload, profile, and learning outcomes. Comparisons should be based on learning outcomes compatibility with reference to the course content. So we do know that all elements of a qualification are important. However, when we are mapping or qualifications, when we are engaging in those activities, we must ensure that we pay keen attention to the similarities between learning outcomes. The NQF level descriptors must be the foundation of credit matrices that express learning outcomes. We know that the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica has learning outcomes for each level. And all of the learning outcomes that are associated with the levels, those must be integral as we seek to do our mapping. The mapping should indicate a minimum 75% overlap between learning outcome of modules for which credits have been awarded and that for which CAT is being sought. And so where there is an overlap of less than 75% of the learning outcomes, a specific plan should be designed by institutions for each learner to fill the outcome gap. And this, of course, must be sanctioned by a senior member of the institution. Now, specific credits may be utilized more than once for separate programs. And we've said this before, and persons were like, oh, what do you mean? Well, you can't use the same credits for the same program, but what if you are doing different programs at different time and both require the same exemption? Then the value of the credit towards that stands. All right. And if persons have any queries on that, we'll take them later. In assessing credits from foreign providers for local use, substantial difference based on objectives, whether you want to use the qualification for professional or academic reasons, that must be taken into consideration, and that will lead to partial or non-recognition. Now, flexibility, very important. Qualifications, once in conformance to accepted quality assurance standards, should be recognized whether formal, informal, or non-formal. So we want all types of qualifications to be considered when we are designing our CATS programs at our institutions. All delivery modes and learning contexts, as well as sectors of origin, should be given recognition once the criteria is met. So it doesn't matter if the person did TVET or not. It doesn't matter if the person was studying online or the person did a distance education course, or they did face-to-face, whatever it is, in whatever context, or whether they earned their credits through prior learning. However it's earned, we must be flexible enough to consider all types of qualifications. Now, flexible options for overlaps of less than 75% between qualifications. What if you have done your mapping and the similarity between the credits that you are looking at have less than 75% similarity? You may choose the option of non-recognition, but we encourage you to redirect persons to an alternative pathway. Don't just leave them hanging. Use of PLAR, you may consider using PLAR to recognize learning that is equivalent to the gap that you find in the credits that the person is asking you to recognize. You may also want to suggest that additional work be done that fulfills learning outcomes prior to credits recognition. We also encourage you to ensure that you have formal agreements between with other entities with application in a non-discriminatory and consistent manner. It's important that you have as many articulation agreements as possible to make it easier for the learners and to give yourself more options. Now, appeals, and this is a touchy point. All institutions offering qualifications and part qualifications should have embedded in their process an opportunity for appeal where the process is considered discriminatory or if there is a concern from an applicant. So persons must have the option to have their cases reviewed. Appeals by registered institutions where credits linked to their qualifications are not recognized by a body to which credits are being transferred. So it may be that someone wanted to use credits earned at your institution at another institution, but the institution turned them down, and you believe that it was unjust. We want to ensure that we have up and running an appeals process that each institution can benefit from. In order to benefit from that, you will have to be legally operating and registered to have your appeals facilitated. The entity from which the credit originates may make the appeal, and the respondent must reply within 30 days, clarifying factors leading to decision. We want institutions to work it out on their own as much as possible. And we would want any appeal tribunal that is set up to be a last resort for institutions to have any grouses, any grouses or any dissatisfaction being settled with. Now, how about the responsibilities? What are some of the responsibilities for implementing the credit accumulation and transfer system? And I'll just look briefly today at some of JTEC's responsibilities as well as higher education institutions. So JTEC will be ensuring that the guidelines are applied to the qualifications that are placed in the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica. JTEC will ensure the integration and coordination of education and training sectors. We will also ensure that we do our research, and as time goes by, we develop policies for credit accumulation and transfer. We will also be providing reports on what is happening in the system to the Ministry of Education and Youth, as well as to international bodies such as UNESCO, as they may need information. And there are other bodies as well that may need information on CATs. We will also coordinate final appellate activities where credit disputes are not resolved by institutions and governance bodies. Remember, this must be a final resort. Now, it is also incumbent upon us to ensure that we support the development of local partnerships, international linkages, and collaboration between sector stakeholders. We will also, as we're doing now, engage in capacity development activities with higher education institutions and governance bodies. And of course, we'll be developing public relations activities regarding the implementation of a national system. Now, what are the responsibilities of education and training providers? It is important for you to adhere to and align policies that you develop, as well as your procedures to the guidelines that have been established. It is also critical that you develop, you publish, and you implement institutional CAT policies. You must also establish articulation agreements as necessary to facilitate credit recognition on the basis of parity of esteem. It is also important that our providers of higher education collaborate when it comes on to curriculum development. This is critical because when you're considering the purpose of qualifications, the function and the type, it makes sense to collaborate. When you collaborate to develop qualifications, there will be seamless credit recognition. It's also critical that you provide career advice, including articulation pathways to learners, as well as information on flexible learning pathways within the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica. You must also establish appeal and monitoring mechanisms that are geared at non-discrimination and transparency. It's also critical that you maintain learner records in accordance with best practices. What we don't want to hear that someone needed to transfer credits, but the institution has no record or the record has been compromised. We know that we live in an age where records are easily compromised because of hackers and so on. And so it is critical that we have the necessary data security procedures in place to prevent that. One of the things that we ask you about when we are assessing and placing qualifications is what type of data security do you have for your records? It's critical that you support learners with the information that is needed to transfer credits to other programs. Institutions should make it very easy. We set up institutions to serve people, and our chief clients or chief customers are our learners. And so each learner shouldn't have to go through hoops in order to get information that they need to transfer credits. Quality assurance, that is a critical responsibility. You must engage in regular internal quality assurance procedures to ensure that CAT program is in sync with established policies and guidelines. It is critical that you do this. Where there are no checks and balances, systems fall apart or they won't be effectively implemented by your team. As we progress in the 21st century, it is critical that we put things in place to make Jamaica the place of choice, to live, to work, and to do business, as we've committed to. Just recently, we've been hearing so much about the SDG goals and the review of number 4, persons talking about, well, heads of states recently, talking about where they are on the various SDG goals. And so we must consider how we can make education a priority, how we can increase access, how we can ensure that what we offer is of value. One way to do that is to ensure that we have flexible learning pathways, that we have articulation pathways that are learner-friendly. And I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on what we've shared? And what advantages will these guidelines have to you? How will it impact your institution? That is one thing that I want to hear from you as we proceed. You may contact us, and I've shared our contact information with you. We look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to seeing appropriate policies, appropriate procedures being implemented in all institutions. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for your company. Looking forward to the questions.
All right, thank you so much, Narda. And before we hear from the other presenters. We do have some time for questions or comments on anything that Narda's just shared. I see Patience has her hand up. Patience, go ahead, and you should be able to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself again, Patience.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Excellently articulated. My first question is it possible? Is it possible? Can you hear me?
We are hearing you. Go right ahead.
Great, great. Because I'm still seeing it telling me to unmute myself, so I'm not sure what that prompt is for. All right. Thank you for your excellent presentation. My first question is, the participant here today, are we able to have access to the presentation you just made?
Sure, no problem.
Because I think, thank you. It will be good that we have access to this
Yes.
presentation, because there are very concerning slides that I saw that I would like to look back at, and that would be great. Thank you. The next question is, considering these policies that is expected based on what you say we have signed to, that means we have signed already to some goals and certain requirements. Does the institution that are church-based have considerations within those already signed to agreements?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Repeat it for me.
Sure, I will. There are certain policies based on your presentation, what you said in the last part, that there are things we have already signed to, we have already agreed to. So the question is, those agreements that as a nation, now we are in the education system, those institutions that are faith-based, were they considered when those policies were signed to? What effect and impact will they have on faith-based institutions?
Okay, I'm going to try to rephrase your question to ensure that I understand it. You want to know if faith-based institutions were considered when we developed the CATS guidelines, and you also want to know if it will have a negative impact on them. I don't foresee any negative impact. In fact, I think what our CATS guidelines will do, it will ensure that there is more equity in the system. It will ensure that there is less discrimination. We know that institutions have complained in the past that other institutions don't recognize their credits, or other institutions are hesitant to recognize them. And what it means now is, if your qualification is recognized by the NQFJ, if it is that you have your accreditation from the UCJ, there should be no problems in you having your credits recognized. What this policy does, it insists that everybody gets a fair chance. It doesn't force the institution to recognize your credits, because there is room for non-recognition. However, they should be able to say why, out of fairness and out of transparency to the learner and to the institution that is sending the credit.
Yeah, thank you for that response. There's another question in the chat. Why should we have articulation agreements between institutions if we have an established national CATS?
Okay, articulation agreements are still important, and they're important because they'll define specifics between institutions. And remember that what we've outlined are guidelines, and so you form your articulation agreements based on the guidelines. It doesn't mean that you don't need to have specific agreements between yourself and another institution.
Okay, thank you. And so we still have opportunity to take another question or comment at this time. I'm seeing a hand up. Ian Waugh. Ian, go right ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Miss Henry. I'm filling in for Mr. Ian Waugh from ANI Learning Academy. Good morning.
Okay, lovely to have you.
Thank you. Mrs. Hall, you mentioned in your presentation, credits can't be used for the same course or institution. Correct me if I'm wrong. Can you expound on that for me, please?
Oh, I didn't say that. What we said is that you can use credits what we said is that you can use the credits more than once. So for instance, let us say you have 2 programs at your institution. You have a bachelor's degree in foreign languages, and you have another bachelor's degree in Spanish. Let us say for the one in foreign languages, there's a specific Spanish course that is required. It is also required for your degree in Spanish. Someone decided to do both, perhaps at separate times. If they used some Spanish credits that they had before and they were exempted from the credits required in the first program, then you should also grant them the same favor for the second program when they come around and decide to study, for instance. So that's an example of what I'm speaking about.
Yes, thank you. There is another question in the chat. How does the Jamaica NQF articulate with the CARICOM qualification framework and the UNESCO qualification framework?
Right, thank you so much for that question. So one of the things that was vital to the development of the National Qualifications Framework was referencing. The National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica has been referenced with all of the international and regional qualifications frameworks that you just outlined. And so the transition is seamless between the frameworks. I know that there is probably going to be some revision to the CARICOM frameworks, but as frameworks are revised, as they change, we continue our referencing and we outline clearly for you what the equivalences are, where there are any doubts.
Thank you so much. I'm just checking if there are any other questions. At this time, we are going to have opportunity for further discussion later on, but not seeing any additional questions nor any hands going up. And so we're going to now invite, oh, there is a question. Is a timeline attached to how long credits are current? Excellent question. Go ahead.
Okay, that is up to the discretion of the institutions. But if that is something that you're suggesting we consider, I can always share it with the qualifications committee, but that's usually up to the discretion of the institutions. One of the things we don't want to do, we do not want to make all the decisions for the institutions. But I know typically most institutions now use about 7 years. But that is really up to the discretion of the institutions.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. We're going to continue the discussion and look at CAC's best practices, challenges, and future plans. And so I'm now going to invite Professor Johnson from the University of Technology, Jamaica, to add his insights to the discussion now. Professor Johnson, over to you.
Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning. We are hearing you loud and clear and seeing your slides.
Hope the slideshow would start. Okay, beautiful. Well, good morning, everyone. And I'm here to share with you the credit accumulation and transfer system, best practices, challenges and future plans, the University of Technology Jamaica's perspective. And I should just acknowledge that we have persons here from J-TEC Jamaica who are very able and capable of addressing some of the issues I'm about to share. So let me go on. So J-TEC by the numbers would look like this. We have approximately 11,000 students, 8 colleges and faculties, about 23 schools or units, over 100 courses of study, 2,000 plus modules, and 9 and counting policies that would impact credit accumulation and transfer systems. So there is a lot to work with as far as J-TEC is concerned. And so I'm going to share with you some of those 9 policies, and I'll be brief as possible. So these are some of the policies that exist. We have the transfer credit and exemption policy. We have a credit banking policy, auditing modules, prior learning assessment. We also have advanced placement and articulation policy. We have a specially admitted student policy, academic collaboration arrangements, as well as mature entry application and the undergraduate admissions and enrollment policy. I should state too that there is an academic advisement policy, and we should also note that these policies go across both graduate and undergraduate programs as appropriate. And this diagram here captures the features of the different policies, and we'll take them one by one here. So in terms of students entering, we have what we call specially admitted students, and these students pursue up to 10 credits per year. And this is, as stated, a special arrangement for these students. So students in this category may audit modules. And when students audit, it is for personal development or exploration. The student may want to use the opportunity to review material they previously may have learned. They may want to update themselves. No assessment is required for auditing. No credit is given. However, they still have to pay for the privilege of auditing a module. This sometimes is combined with other means of access for students so that they can bring themselves up to speed, so to speak, before they enter into a particular course of study. There's credit banking. And in this case, students may pursue up to 25% of a course of study, and records are kept for 7 years. And at the end, the transcripts are available for credit transfer. I'll expand more on the credit banking in later slides. For students, I just term here normal admitted. We have the option of credit transfer, where students would transfer up to 50% of the credits for a particular course in J-TEC. And these must come from an approved tertiary institution. The transferred credits are done at the start of the program. And if it is done later, it would be termed an exemption. And speaking of exemption, students can also transfer up to 50% of credits from non-tertiary institutions to a course of study. The exemptions applied for may be at any time during the program, and there's also a prior learning assessment option for considering those modules that exemptions are applied for. We have prior learning assessment, and this is where we have entry into programs depending, and it depends, on the NQFJ standards and the strength of a PLA portfolio. And lastly, we have advanced placed and articulation policy, where we have automatic placement to year 2 or 3 based on the articulation agreement that we would have had with a partner tertiary institution. So this is automatic, which is different from other cases where this arrangement is not in place. So those, ladies and gentlemen, are the 9 features of different policies that we have. So let us look a little more closely at the credit banking. So with credit banking, it is an academic credit banking service, which is an evaluation and transcript service for those who need to consolidate academic credits or their records. The service extends to persons the opportunity to take existing credit-bearing modules offered in the various colleges and faculties and schools without enrolling in a regular course of study. So it allows a lot of flexibility where access is given. The credits earned may be used towards the attainment of a J-TEC Jamaica certification. They could also take the credit elsewhere and attend other institutions just the same. Academic credit banking is a service that takes all grades for modules taken and puts such grades in a transcript that can be used when applying for enrollment in the J-TEC course of study, and as I said, elsewhere as the client chooses. In terms of transfer credit, a transfer credit is one earned for a module successfully pursued at an approved tertiary institution and deemed equivalent to one in a J-TEC Jamaica course of study. No grades are issued for these credits, but the credits count toward completion of the course of study. Transfer credits, therefore, are not calculated in the grade point average. Only official transcripts and syllabi from other institutions may be evaluated for the award of credit. And to be eligible for evaluation, the grade for the module must appear on the official transcript from the institution. Now, modules used as a basis for matriculation are not recorded as transfer credits. So if you use it to get in, it cannot be counted as a transfer credit. And they do not form a part of the university's record for the student's academic performance. Students may be granted transfer credits that are relevant to their course of study. There is an appeal process, so I will state that that is built into the policy. Continuing, transfer credits will be awarded based on the nature, the level, content, and comparability of the module to that offered by the university. For the equivalent number of credits to be granted, at least 80% of the content of the module syllabus should be there, okay, to that offered by the university. A minimum of the equivalent of the J-TEC Jamaica passing grade is required for credit transfer, and individual schools have the discretion to adopt a higher minimum grade where appropriate. Performance designations other than letter or percentage grades are not acceptable for transfer credit. And these are excerpts from the policy on transfer credits. Now we have some challenges at JTEC, and here are some of them. The first is we need a robust student management system to track the related data. With 11,000 students, over 2,000 modules, and if persons enter in these various designations, it requires a system that can track all of this data. We also need to update, consolidate, and harmonize the related policies. They were not all developed at the same time, and therefore some revision and ensuring any changes that took place within our structure can also be recognized and ensure that we have one smooth set of policies related to our credit accumulation and transfer system. Mainstreaming of CATs so that decision-making process is efficient. And part of this means that we have to be transparent in broadcasting and ensuring that this is a common understanding amongst our colleagues in terms of what is done when we have credit accumulation and transfer systems in operation. There's also the need to clearly have internal promotion and sensitization in the processes related to credit accumulation and transfer. In terms of our future plans, and the first one is a priority for us, is to implement the credit banking policy. This has implications also for our financial health in terms of opportunities to grow our student numbers and to also help in terms of creating pathways for persons to get into our university other than the traditional route. We have to review, update again, and harmonize all related policies, and this is just immediate also, and hopefully it will be done within the next within this academic year. We also need to promote the benefits of the staff, and we have to also develop short courses, micro-credentials for external clients. So I'll just say that this workshop and this forum is timely for us. And lastly, we need to promote aspects of these features to our internal clients, the students, so that they too are aware of what opportunities exist for their own personal development. In terms of some recommendations, a forum to discuss CATS issues of credentials, acceptability, standards, etc. I think that is important, and I commend the JCATS for this opportunity, and I think more of these forums or fora, they are required so that it can be in our consciences in terms of what we do going forward. I also believe we need a registry to store and retrieve information on the credentials, both local and international. And part of our review and discussions, I think, should include the 7-year recency limit for credentials. Maybe for some, it should be 10 years. Maybe for others, it needs to be 3 years. It just depends, I think, on the nature of the module and the content that has to be reviewed. And lastly, we want to have active research on how the credit accumulation and transfer system operates so that we can be on the cutting edge, knowing exactly what is required for our clients and for the transformation of our society regarding their upgrades. And my closing thoughts is that a change of attitude regarding learning pathways is required. Mapped pathways, I believe, provide options and possibilities and serves as an incentive for individuals to develop themselves. So I just commend this JCATS for this opportunity. And I want to acknowledge Mr. Clayton Moore and Mrs. Sandra Lawrence for their contribution in this presentation, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you too, Professor Johnson. So much food for thought. And we're going to continue to deepen this discussion around best practices, challenges, and future plans. And I will now invite Dr. Paul from the Northern Caribbean University to share with us. After which we are going to open the floor to a deeper discussion with the participants. Dr. Paul, over to you.
Okay, I'm just sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen. You
Okay,
can just go to full screen. Go into full screen, but we're seeing and we're hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, is that okay, or do you want me to?
You might want to go to slideshow.
Yeah, I'm doing it.
Yes. There you go.
Okay, so I was asked to present on best practices and future plans in credit accumulation and transfer within higher education institutions. Want to thank Mrs. Hall for this opportunity and for this discussion. This is very important as higher education leader and curriculum person. Professor, so this is very important for higher education institutions. I just want to go first with the definitions of what is credit accumulation and transfer, that is, we are calling it as CAT. And I saw a very important definition, which I liked. And it says a system whereby learners acquire a number of points or credits. Now, for achievement of formally described learning outcomes for part of a course, unit, courses, modules, or individual year. Now, this is a very broad definition, which I like, because credit transfer is not only based on courses. It can be credit transfer, can be based on units, it can be based on modules, and it can be based on year of study. So, and also in higher education, just a minute. In higher education, credit accumulation and transfer is designed so that learners can transfer points from one course or university to another. Now, you might be wondering, what are these points? In the Western world, we basically have credits, and in some areas they have points. If you go to the Eastern world, for example, India, we don't have credits or points, but we have number of hours, which are very important in calculating the transfer credits. So, so we are in this era of increasing data transfer in almost in every sector, okay? Like, for example, if you want to transfer data from an email to WhatsApp, you can do it very easily. Email to Facebook, or WhatsApp to Twitter, or, you know, there is, you can easily transfer data. But when it comes to higher education sector, students can't transfer credits seamlessly, especially from one institution to the other, or from one country to the other, and there it is a big problem. I read this article by Horn and Price 2022 in ERIC database, ERIC article, and it says that yet higher education's broken credit transfer system has plagued students and stumped policymakers for decades. for this day. That means even in 22, first-time students who transfer credits from one institution or from one system to the other lose approximately 43% of the credits on an average. Oh, sorry. On an average. So students are losing. And so there is an increase in time to degree tuition costs that loads and opportunities costs. Therefore, as higher education institutions, we need to create seamless credit accumulation and transfers in our higher education institutions. One suggested model, business model, the authors talked about is transfers in healthcare system in USA. Very interestingly, I have a personal experience with this because my cousin sister works as a transfer administrator in a healthcare system, and she describes to me how they facilitate the patients in transferring from hospital to hospital and also from insurance companies. And they have quite a seamless way to transfer students. But when it comes to higher education, that task is is not seamless. So we need to help our learners earn the credentials, and also we need to, this is a critical issue, and if we do it if we do it robustly, the nation can recover after the pandemic. And so we are living through an uncertain and deeply unsettling time. The government should not simply support traditional higher education institutions, but go beyond, just a minute, go beyond by working to establish a more learner-centered future. And I'm so happy J-TEC has brought this initiative forward to help all higher education institutions in Jamaica to learn about this credit accumulation and transfers. Now, I see credit accumulation and transfers in two ways. One is through the levels of national qualification framework. Jamaica has a beautiful national qualification framework. I have gone through it. Personally, I appreciate the flexibility and the transfer of students from one area to the other. I'm going to show you that picture. Even Mrs. Hall has shown that, but so this is very important. Credit accumulation and transfer is through levels and also within levels in the higher education institutions. So the first one is credit accumulation. You can see Jamaica National Qualification Framework, as Mrs. Hall said, it has 8 levels. Integrated framework covers all learning sectors. And I was very pleased to see that coming from India, learning about National Qualification Framework of India, and have read the South African National Qualification Framework and also the European National Framework. And recently I read about the Hong Kong National Qualification Frameworks, and I see the National Qualification Framework of Jamaica is quite a robust one and also a flexible one. The persons who worked on it did a good work. They cover all learning sectors, include all types of learnings, and there is quality assurance in the learning of the in the programs, level descriptors for each level. And so this is what even Mrs. Hall showed. But what I like is, see here from the certificate level, you can move along to technical to tertiary, and from technical to tertiary education, and even from lifelong learning through flexible learning pathways, you can go into different systems. So it is quite flexible, and I request all the education leaders to go through this national qualification framework. Now, some of the best practices, I have experience of credit accumulation and transfer with different university. As about 20 years I spent in India in higher education, and I worked with universities in the West, like Andrews University, Southern Adventist University, Greeks, and now Northern Caribbean University. One of the best practice that I see in some of these institutions is recognition of prior learning, and my own university back at home is Pfizer Adventist University, is recognition of prior learning and experience. Some of these universities have systems for prior learning and experience. Recently, our faculty, Dr. Grace Kelly, Director of Curriculum, along with other faculty, visited Andrews University. They have prior learning pathway for students to get degrees, and they have attended the graduation of students, and it was a very good experience. I think this is one best practice which we all have to embrace, and prior learning and experience should be duly recognized for consideration for program articulation and credit transfer, provided that learning outcomes, this is very important, learning outcomes are appropriately assessed and matched. So the words are assessed and matched. If sometimes we have to be careful also. Sometimes the learning outcomes might be assessed, but they might not be matched. So these two words, assessed and matched, is important in prior learning, taking students with prior learning. Higher education institutions are admitting students their undergraduate programs through prior learning and experience, and also taught postgraduate programs. And so it is done case by case and by interviews, and mature applicants who do not meet the stipulated entrance requirements may be admitted on a case by case. So this is one best practice I have seen as I worked with different universities around the world. The next one is recognition of multiple flexible learning pathways. So as we all know, there are different learning pathways. Before, it was just one learning pathway, but as I have said, even National Qualification Framework talks about different learning pathways, and therefore we should provide flexibility and expand access to qualifications that lead to registration or licensing in a given sector. So well-articulated learning pathways established through collaboration between corporate academies and relevant institutions can facilitate and promote learning mobility. So in the NQF, you can see the certification pathway, the prior learning pathway, the technical and vocational, which can merge, into tertiary framework. Also, one other best practice from my reading and my experience is cross-sector collaboration. I saw this very in recent, last year, I have noticed in discussion with Professor Dr. Marjorie Buckley, there was an initiative of the Ministry of the Government of Jamaica. This was a cross-sector collaboration. This was school to college pathway program. There was a collaboration between the schools in the system, then the industry partners, and also the industry partner was here, the Ministry of Education, and then the university. All three put together, they were doing a pilot of the cross-sector collaborations, which was very good pilot, and I hope we can take that on in the coming days. So these are the three best practices I have from my experience and from my reading I have found. Now coming to the next transfer, credit accumulation of transfer within the levels, that is within higher educational institutions. Now, higher education, the transfer can be seamless when we have policies in our institutions regarding transfers. This is important. And some of the best practices I have also experienced and read about is about centralized automated systems to process credit transfers, and also credit transfer websites in the higher education institutions website, and data gathering through information technology and insights gained. So these are some of the best practices we can have in our higher education institutions. And also one of the thing that can help us is establishing MOUs with different higher education institutions. So some of the institutions send their learners or students to us, and we send our learners to other higher education institutions. And if there is an understanding and MOUs between these institutions, students can seamlessly move from one institution to the other. And as I talked earlier, departments also can have from one institution to the other institutions, they can have cross-institutional partnerships. So this is also a best practice. Whatever it is, the courses or the subject should be mapped so that they can be eased the seamless transfer of students, credit accumulation and transfer. Now, also one of the through my experience, I was back in India, and we were transferring our students from an Indian university to an American university. Now, it is important as educational leaders that we understand different higher education institutions around the world if you want to be global. Because in some cases, they don't have credits like in the Western world. They just have subjects. They have a number of hours that they spend in learning. They have objectives or core learning outcomes. So in such cases, we cannot say, oh, you can't transfer into our programs because you don't have credits. So it's important for educational institutions to have persons who understand, who have a global view of credit transfers that can help the institutions. Now, there's experience, a case here based on a university in Hong Kong. On its long experience of implementing CAT, a university has streamlined the process for applicants by developing pathway entry programs at QF levels, 5 and 6. That is in the master's level too. And so we need to be very flexible and open-minded when it comes to credit transfers, because around the world, universities are doing that. Learners have found this arrangement very simple and convenient because they know before making their application which courses are needed to fulfill the graduation requirement of the pathway program. Now, coming to NCU, and Northern Caribbean University Credit Accumulation and Transfer, we have a very robust transfer policy, and we have procedures in place. We have an automated system for processing credits with course mappings for different institutions. I'm happy to share that Dr. Gloria Gregory is here. She was the one who developed these systems. Though, if a student comes from one higher education institution, basing on the study and so on, this was developed. So we have a number of higher education institutions in Jamaica and around the world in this automated system. Then we have multiple ways of entry pathways which are used at NCU. We know the traditional one is 5 general certificates of education from CXC and GC and so on. We also transfer credits from an approved tertiary institution with at least sophomore standings. We transfer 32 credits for associate programs, 96 credits for a bachelor's program, the same way in the master's and doctoral program. So we are quite flexible there. And we also accept students by SAT scores. We also accept students diploma and certification from approved tertiary institutions, and also associate degrees from approved tertiary institutions. We also accept students when they come in the program with American College testing scores. One flexible pathway that we have from many years is catering to the students who don't have the 5 subjects in their CXC. And so here, students who don't fulfill matriculation requirements can join pre-university and also take some courses at the university basing on the subjects needed. For example, if the student need 2 subjects, they will join for those 2 subjects in the pre-university program. They can also do 6 credits in the university sector. If they have 1 subject needed to pass, then they can do 9 credits in the university. So this was very, for many years, this is flexible, and this helps the students to be in the system. Then the other pathway is mature age entrance. If the students have is about 25 years, and if they have 2 passes in CXC, we give them mature age entrance tests, and basing on that, we take the students into our programs. Then we also cater to technical and vocational graduates. We also cater to transfer of students from approved institutions like national and international, basing on national and international MOUs. Currently, some of our students are studying in Brandon and the other universities in Canada and USA, and they can bring study some courses there, and they can transfer those credits seamlessly into our system. And also we have some students from Columbia and the other Adventist universities who come and study here, and these credits are transferred seamlessly into their programs. So basing on the number of MOUs we have, this transfer of students and their credits is seamless. And also we cater to students, special students who don't have entry requirements, but who want to do just a non-degree. We allow them to do courses, and they for a year or 2, so that they can have university experience. We also cater to full-time working students. If they don't have the entry requirements, if they wish to work with us for a year, they work, and by that time they can enter into the program they want. Transient students, I just explained. So these are some of the flexible pathways we have at Northern Caribbean University. Future plans is currently we are working on a prior learning and experience assessment policy. We need to get this out as soon as possible. We also are looking at stackable micro-credentials because we have a robust digital education center. And so we would like to see how students come into our various programs with stackable micro-credential entry. We would also like to revise our automated system, and also have our website with credit transfer component. And we also would like to survey and research the experience of students, transfer students to improve the system and the learners. Thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul. Very, very interesting, very thorough, and going to now open the floor up to our attendees to look at, just to take their questions and comments. Excuse me, pardon. So the first question, it really was posed to Professor Johnson, but Dr. Paul, I think it is a useful question for you to respond to as well. And that question is, just give me a second to bring it up here. What are your policies on credit exemptions? So Professor Johnson, you could answer, and then followed by Dr. Paul.
Yes, we don't use the term credit exemptions. So if it is if it is meant transfer credits, I think I intimated that policy in the presentation. So maybe if the person could expand a little more, Gloria Gregory, what is meant by credit exemption. That is not a term I am familiar
Right,
with.
let me, so Gloria, I'm going to ask you if it is possible for you to unmute and to elaborate on your question, Gloria, if you wish.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question, and I'd like to commend the presenters so far for an excellent webinar that we're experiencing. Now, there are some universities that make a distinction between transfer credits and exemptions, and I'm noticing that. So I wanted to know, well, Dr. is saying that they do not have that policy at JTEC, where individuals might not need to do a course, maybe they're exposed to a course or content that is required for a program, but they would not need to do that particular course again, because there's a similarity in content. What would they do for if the course is required, but the person has some experience in that already? So, how would they?
Yeah, the exemption, okay,
Yes.
the exemption policy allows for the student to get an exemption if they can show that they are competent and they have cleared what is required, both in content, in depth, in breadth. And the course of study program director would make such a determination. So yes, there is exemptions that are given. I didn't go into that, but the policy, if you recall, the presentation did speak about transferring up to 50% of the particular course of study. And I mentioned that there's a PLA option. So in the event there's not necessarily a transcript with stated grades and so on, but the person can prove by a portfolio that they have covered the particular content experientially and so on, they can be so assessed and given that exemption. I should mention that we have our PLA coordinator present, Ms. Sandra Lawrence, who could elaborate if she cares to join the discussion. But yes, we do provide exemptions in that regard.
Thank you. Dr. Paul, would you like to weigh in here?
Yes, as I know, when we transfer a credit to another institution, that credit is counted and you don't need to do that course. That is a transfer credit. But when a course is exempted, you don't need to do that particular course, but the credit is not given to that for us, the total credits to graduate is 128. So in that 128, that credit is not given, but the student is exempted. So there is a difference between transfer credit and a course that is exempted.
Okay, thank you. Now, the questions are coming in. I'm seeing a hand also. So let me take up another question from the chat. And it's just a very specific question. For an institution that offers allied healthcare level 3, which is an international accreditation, can the students use their credits from that course to continue their studies at another institution that offers a registered nursing degree? I don't know if anybody can answer that question.
Well, I can say that depending on the programs, if some universities accept that, some don't, for specifications basing on ministry, on their accreditation units. So there are some universities which accept, some don't, basing on their specific accreditations.
My response would be the Jamaica Nursing Council
Yes.
have something to say in terms of what is accepted. So those standards would have to be applied.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to invite Sharon Elaine. Sharon, you may unmute and ask your question or make your comment.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
It's just a comment regarding something that Professor Hal Johnson would have said in talking about credits being transferred. He said it had to come from an approved institution. Now, within the context of the JTEC, what would you consider an approved institution? Is it one that is accredited? Is it one that you have to find it listed within on those approved lists within the country? What would you consider approved?
If you note, I said approved and I didn't say accredited. And I was quoting directly from our policy. And
that was my thing.
Yes. And so it has a lower threshold of acceptability, so to speak. And I think it's just a matter of expert judgment from those who are familiar with the area, and they would also be aware of the marketplace or the landscape in terms of where the instruction or the delivery of this particular degree or qualification took place. So I would just say at this point, it's a judgment call based on the experts that are assessing what comes in as a qualification. But we don't have, as you described, a list at this point, but that is something to think about as to how you get on our approved list. So I hope that satisfies.
Thank you. Good to go. Franklin, I see your hand, but let me allow another member of the panel, Mrs. Seymour Hall. She might need to weigh in on some of the questions asked already. Go ahead, Mrs. Hall.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Parks. I'd just like to comment on two things. The first one is about international accreditation. And just to remind everyone, I think I'd said it in my presentation, we know that foreign qualifications, while they're not placed on the national qualifications framework of Jamaica, they can be aligned to the framework. And so, as Professor Johnson said, the professional body that is responsible can assist there. And in assessing credits from foreign entities for use locally, the substantial differences are going to be evaluated. And where there are no substantial differences, then we expect that the body will allow for partial recognition or full recognition. And that is very important because we want to ensure that our system is as integrated as it can be, and no learner is discriminated against in that regard. So there is room for foreign qualification recognition, and that's another policy that is going to be further clarified, because currently we're working on a national qualifications system policy, and all of those things are going to be further ventilated in that policy. The other question, somebody spoke about, how do you know when an institution is approved? And I can understand the response that Professor Johnson gave. One of the things that we want to do going forward, and we know it will take time, we want to ensure that all institutions, as far as possible, start some kind of some type of start the accreditation process, so that their programs, as far as possible, are all submitted for accreditation. And we also recommend that institutions submit their qualifications for placement on the framework. NCU and UTEC, as well as UE, UCC, and a few other institutions have started the process of submitting their qualifications in the qualifications registry of Jamaica. And we expect that once we have or qualifications placed in the registry will now become the location that persons look to when they want to know which qualifications have been assessed, are in line with the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica. And basically, as we outlined earlier, we would not expect any type of unfavorable view of those qualifications. Thank you.
Thanks much. I'm going to now invite Franklin Bennett. He has his hands raised. Go ahead. You can pose your question.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. A very, very informative session so far. And I'm so happy that we are cleaning up so that we can contain this monster that we call discriminator with respect to matriculation. My question is for Dr. Paul. You mentioned earlier in an explanation about credit exemption, and you use the example, say the total credit is 120, and say a person gets exempt from a course, and that course may have valued 3 credits. So the total will now be 3 credits less. Would that person has to do a replacement in order to amass that total for graduation or certification?
Yes, the course is exempted, but the credit is not added. So that is, so it's important to get, when you transfer as a student, it is important to get transfer credits than exemptions. You know, yes, exemptions are there, but still you have to do those credits. Is it clear? Mr. Franklin?
Okay. I'm as a student, and I'm looking at cost benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that be a little unfair to me?
Yeah, but you might get exemption for a course, but you can do different other courses to make up that 120 or 128 or whatever it is. Yeah, and that's why as students, it's important to get more transfer credits than exemptions. And
Okay.
Dr. Gloria Gregory is here. She can give more enlightenment to this. She's our registrar at Northern Caribbean University.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And the questions continue. There's a question in the chat from Ermont Williams. There's a question for Mrs. Hall, the Seymour Hall. Is Jamaica establishing a national CATS? And if that's the case, then how will graduates of accredited institutions or accredited programs benefit without having to face discriminatory practices and lengthy or challenging processes? It seems to Earl Mont that some institutions disregard the accreditation status of other institutions and programs. Doesn't accreditation account for anything? So Norda?
Thank you so much for that question. And that's one of the challenges that my presentation sought to address. It is necessary for us to institute this, and that is why I've shared with you the proposed guidelines for our credit accumulation and transfer system. It is critical that we put an end to these discriminatory practices. The principles that we outlined earlier included transparency, access, mobility and articulation, learner-centeredness, flexibility, and opportunity for appeals. And I think the opportunity for appeals is critical. Institutions must have they must have internal policies that allow for appeals. Institutions will also have the opportunity to make external appeals where they have a problem with credits being recognized by other institutions. And I do believe that the time is overdue for us to have this, because it is true that we have seen instances of elitism in our system. We've seen instances where institutions may not regard others. And in order for us to advance, we must do so as partners. We must do so in a collaborative environment where each is respected.
Thank you. There is another question in the chat. What is the process institutions must go through for their qualifications to be placed on the qualifications register? I think that's a question for Mrs. Seymour Hall.
Right. Okay. I'm so happy that you are interested in having your qualifications placed on the framework. So if you're interested in having your qualifications placed on the framework, the first thing you need to do is contact us. We have on our website, you are going to be given a password as well as a username. That password and username will be used for us to access our website so that you can basically put the basic information needed for a qualifications statement. If it is that your qualification is not yet accredited, it's a longer process. You're going to be submitting an application form that goes through 4 standards. You'll be submitting information on 4 areas. You'll be given a comprehensive breakdown on all the information related to your qualification elements and so on. We'll then compile a team of assessment and placement experts. And these persons will include a subject matter expert for the area of that the qualification deals with. Once your qualification has gone through the process of a desk review, verification and validation, and it is approved by our qualifications committee, you will then have your qualification placed in the registry, and persons will be able to access it publicly. They'll see what level of the NQF it is equivalent to, and they'll be able to make their international and local comparisons. The International Standard of Education number equivalence will also be reflected on your qualification. So importantly, send me an email, call us at JTEC. You may do so now. We're looking forward to having all your qualifications placed on the framework. And I must say, before I end my answer here, Dr. Parks, for institutions that are already accredited, we sample 5% of the qualifications. So 5% of the qualifications, we'll have a detailed look at them. We'll use the standards to do a detailed assessment of those qualifications, but they only need to submit 5% in detail. The others, they'll enter through the website, just enough information for us to create a qualifications profile.
Okay, good to hear, good to know. So there's another question in the chat from Sandy Lawrence. This one is directed at Dr. Paul. What is the advantage of pursuing exemptions at Northern Caribbean University?
Well, yes, exemptions are also good. Like, for example, in a major, if you're doing counseling and you get exemption for a course, but you need to have the total credits in that area. So instead of doing that particular course, again, you can do another course related to the counseling area. Or if it is in the general education area, you got an exemption for a particular course, you can, that will not be added to the total, but you're exempted from doing the course. But so you have the leverage to take any course which you like to make up to the 120 credit. So it gives that flexibility again to add to your body of knowledge. So even though it doesn't have that much advantage as credits, it also has its advantage in giving you the breadth of knowledge in the major or in other areas. So financially, it might not give that advantage, but in terms of increasing your knowledge, you can get that.
Thank you so much. And Patience is saying, excellent response, Dr. Paul. I have a question.
Thank you.
I think this one is for Mrs. Seymour Hall, but Dr. Paul and Professor Johnson could weigh in as well. And I suppose I come at this from the perspective, not from a higher institution per se, but from a provider of workplace training. And increasingly, participants in workplace training are asking providers, oh, you know, can this be, is it accredited? Can we get credits? Mm-hmm. People are wanting, it seems, the marketplace increasingly demanding, as it were, a collaboration when it comes to the credit systems and credit transfer systems between workplace learning and, you know, higher education institutions. And so I'm very curious, you know, what are your thoughts? How can this work? Should they be separate? You know, what's the thinking around that?
Okay, a very interesting question. Workplace learning. This is from a personal experience. As we were building a house in Jamaica, we had masons and other workers. At that time, the Heart Trust NTA group people came to certify them. And so they got, some of them got level 1, level 2, based on the work that they were doing. And so if those same persons reach to level 3, and that if they want to go to a certain area in the tertiary education system, we should be able to accept them because the NQF is allowing for such transfers. So it is a good thing to give them certification so that they can go forward in life.
From my perspective, workplace training is an important aspect of developing our human capital. And can this be accredited? I think UCJ would have to answer that, because there are some universities or is that what they call it? That some companies set up. But in terms of recognition, I think, yes, the University of Technology Jamaica can recognize some training programs in different workplaces. And there can be an MOU with these various workplace training units. And we can then work with our prior learning assessment unit, as well as other, and our JTEC Academy, as well as our various colleges and faculties and schools, in having some arrangement where particular courses or modules can be taught within the work environment. So yes, that's a strong possibility.
Hey, Mrs. Seymour Hall.
Thank you. Just the other day, there was a conversation in another webinar about workplace certification. And one of the things that came up was the importance of workplaces ensuring that they have their own training programs. It is critical. Yes, it is important for workplaces to partner with universities to create programs. It is important for them to create customized certifications for their staff. And I know that Heart Trust NTA, for instance, they offer customized certification. They offer NCT vet qualifications to persons within the workplaces. They offer unique qualifications to them based on what is required at work. And I think it is very critical for higher education institutions to do the same. It is critical that persons in certain niche areas that you may not have a degree at JTEC or NCU or so waiting for them to do, because you wouldn't get enough persons to do it, but you can create for that particular sector specific programs. And that is a part of the reason, we've really focused on creating standards for micro-credentials because it's critical that our micro-credentials are recognized. It is critical that there are standards to govern them. And we've worked with a task force. We have those micro-credential standards in draft. We are hoping by the end of the year that those will be final. But it is so critical for us to have these standards because persons must be recognized for what they know within the workplaces. And just to add to that by saying that within the standards, we've recognized the role of the employers, and we have responsibilities for them. And a part of the responsibility is for them to ensure that they use prior learning assessment within workplaces, that when they have seminars and so on, they recognize credits that are earned, and they partner with training institutions to make those credits accessible. Many times we participate in various activities and it is not recognized, or we simply get a certificate of participation. Yes, it's nice to get certificates of participation, but we also want to see persons earning credits where they can earn credits. And so we have to look at it from that perspective. We live in a country where there isn't a skills deficit, but there certainly is a qualification deficit. And so we want to recognize the skills within workplaces, and we want to ensure that persons are able to fulfill their truest potential and persons are rewarded. In speaking about credit accumulation and transfer, earlier in my presentation, I mentioned the fact that it is also about rewarding persons. And so we must be prepared to reward them where it's possible. I also want to mention the fact that at J-TEC, we designed a human capital development strategy. And one of the things we've been doing, we've been partnering with institutions in order to have persons certified at their workplaces in the fastest time possible. So for instance, right now, at Duane Park and at George Headley, There are some food service workers, and they're being certified by city and guilds for the skills that they have in food service, for the skills that they're able to demonstrate on the job. And these processes don't need to be long. We can use prior learning along with micro-credentials and get persons the certifications that they need in a very quick time. It is critical that we do that because we live in the 21st century. Reskilling and upskilling is something that we have to do continuously, and we have to be agile. We have to reform our policies where necessary to accommodate these things.
Thank you. Much food for thought. I'm going to ask Patience. She has her hand up. Patience, you can unmute and share.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Parks and Ms. Hall, and all the presenters. It has been a very wonderful and informative session. I have a question in the chat, just thinking out of the box. I don't know if that is relevant here. I see where there are young men in Jamaica, a lot of young men, and they are out there unemployed. Okay, so if you're going to be certifying those in the workplace, so while they are at work, they are already engaged. What about those who are not engaged at this time? Is there a space for them in all of this? Because I am thinking of creating human resources for a nation, as well as I know that Hatros NTA have various programs. So those young men on the streets, in the community, Rose Town, Kasha Park, what do we do with them? They are strong men, they are able-bodied. How do we encourage them to come into these type of programs so that they too can get the training, or some of them even have, we don't know. So the engaging of each of these groups is critical as well, so that they can move forward. That is nation building, that is capacity building. So I want Ms. Hall, Dr. Hall, to tell us how this group of people will be catered for.
Very deep question, because I think it's not that the opportunity isn't there. I mean, there's so much work that's been done through Hard Trust NSTA in partnership with other groups, the Ministry of Labor, we think about Project STAR. So the opportunity is there. The question is, what is the strategy to attract and retain them in the system, because they're outside of the formal system, this target group you're talking about, and they are perhaps not even considered part of the formal labor market. Maybe not even seeking jobs, you know, and they're outside of the education system. And so the strategy is not so much that there isn't the opportunity to do it. There is, but the question is, what strategy you get to get them in, get them motivated, get them in this in the formal framework and retain them there? I mean, wow, that's the question. Narda, I don't know if you have any answers, you know.
I'll tell you what our belief is. You have to get in the communities. There's no other way. You have to meet people where they are. You have to find out what it is that appeals to them, and you have to meet them at their level. Many persons are intimidated by large universities, and they don't see those spaces as being a part of the space that they should occupy. They see it as a privileged space, and they don't see themselves as being privileged. So they're not going to walk into the University of Technology or Northern Caribbean University and say, what do you have for me? That's not going to happen, because our society is structured in such a way that many persons see themselves as being outside of the center, and they're on the periphery, and they are not going to come into the center as willingly as another person from a different background. And so we must have community-based interventions. We must have community relationships. One of the things that we are proposing are community certification fairs. And this is where you go into the community and you find out what is it that these people need. Sometimes we bring things to people too. We bring things that they don't want. Young men in particular, they are very, they want to advance themselves and they want to be able to provide for their families. They want to be able to provide for themselves. Jamaican people believe in respect. Jamaican people have their pride, and we have to start by finding out what is it that you want. Find out what they want, and if you can also share with them some other things or options that they can choose from, then you do. And once you find out what a person's ultimate end game is and what it is that they're looking forward to, you can start a conversation and you can talk to them. So we have to ensure, even though we've come a far way, that we don't come across as being up there and them down there. We have to ensure that we develop short courses, micro-credentials again, that persons can easily access. Sometimes, and I've said this so many times, sometimes our micro-credentials are geared towards persons that already have 1,000,001 qualifications. But what about that person who doesn't have any? Do we think about them when we are developing these types of qualifications? So that is something that we have to think about. Community-based education. It's not just for HEART, Trust NTA, or TVET. We must think about community-based programs, whether we consider ourselves to be traditional higher education institutions. We must adapt to the needs of our people and our time, because we'd be surprised to see the range of interest that the common man on the street, as we'd call him, has.
Thank you so much. And, you know, we're talking about Jamaican context, but I know there are similar challenges being faced with our Caribbean brothers and sisters. And I want to just take a little time to acknowledge persons from across the CARICOM region who are with us in this virtual space. I see Mr. Marcelino Choco from the Ministry of Public Administration in Belize. Welcome, sir. I see Malaika Lyons Best from Trinidad and Tobago, as well as Wendy Hernandez. And I know there are others. So for those who are joining from other countries, do feel free to either raise your hand, place in the chat, any similarities that you're seeing with your own journey in relation to qualifications, frameworks, etc. There is a question in the chat. Will micro-credentials be quality assured for portability and to allow access for holders of such credentials into the formal tertiary level education or training programs? And how will CAT impact these type of credentials?
Okay, so the idea is that micro-credentials should allow for access to formal programs. The idea is that micro-credentials, the reason standards are being established is so that micro-credentials can be quality assured. And also, it's critical that when we're designing programs as far as possible, if we can make them modular, I think that's a good idea, so that they can be broken down into bits and pieces, into micro-credentials. And that's where CATS comes in, because persons will earn credits from micro-credentials, and you want them to be able to accumulate and transfer these credits to other programs. You want persons to be able to be provided with digital badges that they can display. Digital badges that they can easily move from place to place, that are viewed internationally, so that they can be recognized and they can move ahead with their lives. So that's an excellent question, and thank you so much for that.
Great. No, I saw that earlier. Dr. Jeanette Barclay Bryan had her hand up from the University of Technology. So, Dr. Barclay Bryan, would you like to weigh in here?
Okay, it was about the earlier question to do with the persons, a lot of young men you see on the street.
Yes.
So can I go ahead and still comment on that?
Yes, please do.
Right. And I'm glad for the approach Dr. Hall to Dr. Nordia about the community-based training. I had just wanted to say that efforts have been made, and it isn't for want of trying, but it is multi-dimensional. So I wanted to just say that I know at JTEC, one, we have a program through our community service department, just reaching out to persons around in the community. And one of the immediate needs that we recognize is the educational level of the persons in the community. Because through the SDC, when we looked at some of the communities, we realized that persons between 18 to 34 may have actually fallen below what we call even grade 9 level to be able to go to heart. And so years ago, JTEC Jamaica had conversations with, then it was JFLL, and we had conversations with Heart Community Base, and we went as far as to connect with the Commonwealth of Learning, because we recognized that that was a gap in our system. Persons were falling in the cracks, where because they were below grade 9, they could not have begun the hard program. And we realized that there was a problem also with literacy. And so I mentioned Commonwealth of Learning because we looked at what was called vocational literacy, and we found samples across the world. We went as far as Papua New Guinea, and we were looking at programs about how to teach the basic literacy skills while persons would earn their vocational skills. And we had reached out to NCTVET also to get you the qualification. So I'm just sharing with you that it may be in some cases a little deeper than you think, because you have to establish what are the literacy levels, because invariably a lot of what you're doing involves reading and writing. So it's an area I'm always interested in, but I just wanted to mention that it is still on the table because of how we would award credits there, but that we have to examine the communities, and that is where, as Dr. Nordia said, the community-based initiative would be critical, because you then have to partner with other agencies, even the community, especially like the SDC. And I know there were also opportunities to train through criminal justice programs and so. So I'm just saying, who you see on the street just as young men who may be loitering, or, you know, in some cases, you know, just eat a food and all of that. You have to understand the social dynamics. And the last thing I'll say is, fortunately, there were sample programs we were seeing that were called Earn and Learn, because that was the other aspect where we started at JTEC to put on short courses based on some of the units that, you know, we recognize through Heart and NCTVET. And you would have a program, and after 3 sessions, you did not see persons again because they had to go earn, or they would come for parts of a day. And so even how you time it, all of that, it couldn't conflict with what their, you know, quick skills to earn money. And we were also conscious that in the, what you call it, tavern area, there were programs that had already been done by some of the universities and not, and so the sustainability element you have to look at. So there were, for example, what was it called again? For aquaculture, ornamental fish farming. If you go into the community, you see traces of some of those projects that were part of efforts from various bodies to train and to provide skills and provide employment. So I'm just saying it bears further investigation and study, because sometimes we from the established maybe institutions or from, you know, other spheres who are already formally educated or, you know, have our credentials, we assume that we can carry the same model to communities. So long extended answer, but essentially I'm saying the need is there. We still need to make the efforts, but we're just cautioning to say community-based and study, and above all, you have to get persons from within the community to own it, and then they can help to mobilize it, because when you are outside of a community, you know, it is harder to sustain. All right, but I'm putting it there for JTEC and to continue our conversation, but wanted to give that dimension to it. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Sandy Lawrence has her hand or his hand up. Sandy, you can go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Parks. I'm just picking up on the community-based approach to getting persons involved in these short courses and these micro-credentials. I'm thinking that perhaps the sensitization needs to begin at the secondary level, because the signs would have been there, you know, the signs would have been there regarding individuals' ability to get those 5 CSEC passes and to get into a tertiary institution in a normal way. So even at that level, through guidance, counseling, and whatever means are available at the secondary level, students can be sensitized to these other options, these flexible pathways, and so on. I know that there's City and Guilds, which is an option to straightforward CSEC subjects, but even what we're talking about now, the PLAR on the spot, the micro-credentials, the short courses, and so on, I'm thinking that even at that level, students can be sensitized towards these opportunities. So we don't wait until they're on the street and not doing anything with their lives. We get them involved, if it's even at the level of thought, from their in secondary school. So they can see that, okay, fine, I'm not capable of handling the CSEC, but maybe I can take up this short course or this micro-credential and build my qualifications and eventually make it to where I want to be. So it's about taking them from where they are to where they want to be, rather than having them idling and getting into trouble, especially the young men. After they're through with secondary school, we want to catch them from there within secondary schools and direct them appropriately to some of these pathways. I don't know how Ms. Hall feels about that suggestion, or any of the other presenters.
Well, I certainly agree. We know that we have the 6th form pathways that was recently introduced by the Ministry of Education, where the various pathways are outlined and given to the students. We know that many of them start doing the Heart and the City and Guilds courses in high school. I'm thinking that other higher education institutions can look at what they can offer in students even while they're in high school. Perhaps you can look at the partnerships that you can engage in to make it possible, and how you can play a stronger role within the 6th form pathway system for those who may not be on the scene right now. And you can also look at how they can leave high school with some of your qualifications. And so I absolutely endorse what Ms. Lawrence is proposing.
Much. Now there is a question in the chat, and Mrs. Hall, I noticed you started to respond in the chat, but maybe it bears saying a little bit more on it. So the question was from Devon Case, and he is asking the question as it relates to breaking a course into modules from micro-credentials. So how does an institution adopt this when it is not attuned to the general mode of operation? So I don't know if you wish to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Right, and so I understand what he's saying. If you've been operating in a traditional way that doesn't include this, it means that you'll have to change the way you configure your courses. And so that can be a long bureaucratic process. But if it is that the institution wants to do it, it can be done. And I'm suggesting that you can take it in bite-sized pieces. you may not be able to overhaul your entire system, but you can certainly decide to start small, start with a few of your courses. And then certainly you also want to learn from others. So you may want to, join a community of practice. You may want to find out from other institutions how they've been able to make the change or how they've been able to manage both systems. I think that's one way to go about it, but I do understand what he's saying. It's not easy to get up and change how you operate.
I see a hand up, Erlemont Williams. Go right ahead. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
I hope you're hearing me. Thank you.
We are hearing you.
Okay, great. And good afternoon to you and to the members of the panel and to my other colleagues here. I put a question in the chat that I think you unintentionally overlooked. So I just wanted to raise it. And it's this: what's the role of the UCJ, perhaps in collaboration with J-TEC, relative to the national CATs and the establishment of standards for the recognition of micro-credentials and short courses?
Okay, I don't know if anybody from UCJ is on. But certainly UCJ is responsible for accreditation and they continue to play that role. Whenever we develop standards, we certainly do share them with UCJ. And so UCJ has reviewed our proposals and we continue to work together. They're aware of what it is that we propose. And one of the things that institutions have to be mindful of is the reality that UCJ was around before J-TEC. And so there are many activities that UCJ would have been responsible for prior to J-TEC being activated. And some of them, for instance, registration of institutions, J-TEC is now responsible for that. In terms of their work with accreditation, UCJ is responsible for that. And so we work together to ensure that the institutions maintain standards in terms of the placement of your qualifications and the framework and matters relating to the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica, the Qualifications Registry of Jamaica, then that is J-TEC's remit. But if anybody from UCJ is on and wants to add to what I've said, then they may do so, I'm sure.
All right. So I am not seeing any further questions at this time, and we're really winding down to the end. And at this time, I'm going to invite, I see David Myers. David, go ahead. And following David's question, we're going to invite Anthea Thompson, NQF officer with J-TEC, to give the summary. Go ahead, David.
Good well, it's afternoon actually, colleagues.
Depends on where you're joining from. Still morning.
Yeah, well, I am in Jamaica. I'm the senior standards officer with the UCJ. And just following on from what Mrs. Hall was speaking about, the UCJ and J-TEC do have a very collaborative relationship, and we are working closely to continue to provide the service that our higher education institutions and training organizations and other training providers require going forward relating to the changes across the landscape in Jamaica. Certainly in regards to the gentleman's question about micro-credentials, the UCJ has been working towards the finalization and promotion of standards and guidelines for micro-credentials. These will be produced in short order, It took a collaborative approach. There was a committee in place, well-placed individuals, both locally, regionally, and internationally, who worked towards these standards and guidelines that will serve to provide some guidance and structure. Now, micro-credentials, we know it's a buzzword, but we've been doing it for a long time. We've been calling them continuing education courses. We've been calling them short courses. We've been calling them flexible modules. It's just we're trying to meet persons where they are now in terms of the multitude of institutions and organizations that are seeking to offer this flexible types of training to different individuals for different purposes and contexts, whether those come from traditional programs or whether they're created on demand or whether they're done in collaboration with other entities to solve a particular training need. But certainly we will be working with JTEC and other partners going forward to ensure that these guidelines are in place so that our students, our working individuals who are taking these courses are not disadvantaged, and that they can get recognition for their exploits that can progress them either on to further education or into other programs. Thank you, Dr. Parks.
You too. And I see that Angela has added in the chat that yes, the UCJ and JTEC continues to work together to assure quality in our higher education and training sector. Fantastic. So, Anthea Thompson, NQF officer from JTEC, we want to hand over to you now to do our closing, our summary, etc. Anthea, over to you.
Hey everyone, I hope you're hearing me clearly.
We are hearing you. I don't know if you want to turn on your video. Yes. There, we're seeing you.
All right, thanks so much. All right, great to have everyone here. I hope and trust that it was an interesting and enjoyable session. Just want to touch on basic points that were made by our presenters and just to summarize a bit for you. So Mrs. Norda Seymour Hall was our first presenter, and her delivery was focused on the guidelines developed by JTEC for the development of a credit accumulation and transfer system. And it was in the context of the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica, it's the NQFJ. Of note, a CAT system should operate in an environment allowing for adherence to principles of transparency, access, mobility, and articulation. Learner-centeredness, flexibility, and opportunities for appeals are also areas of principles that are associated with the CATS system. The scope and purpose of credit accumulation and transfer system was shared, and the scope refers to all providers of post-secondary education in Jamaica, including professional bodies and organizations awarding qualifications for successful pursuits of learning programs and activities. All qualifications and part qualifications assessed and placed on the NQFJ and listed in the Qualifications Registry of Jamaica, regardless of learning modes, learning and delivery modes. In terms of the purpose, the guidelines and procedures for the credit accumulation and transfer system were noted to be the establishment of processes and principles for the resolution of discriminatory or inequitable processes, position credit accumulation and transfers within and accessible flexible learning pathways and access and articulation principles, and to integrate CAT in qualifications and micro-credentials design. In terms of responsibilities for key stakeholders, this was another highlighted area presented by Mrs. Hall, And this included major sharing points outlined for the audience. The responsibilities of JTEC as the governance body was highlighted, and also education and training providers, their responsibilities in this space was indicated also. Our second presenter, Dr. Haldane Johnson Professor Haldane Johnson, sorry, from the University of Technology, shared some interesting and critical demographic data relating to the University of Technology, Jamaica. There are currently 6 policies he indicated, which have been developed by UTEC to support its credit accumulation and transfer system. Some examples of these included credit banking, auditing of modules, credit transfer, exemption, prior learning assessment, and advanced placement and articulation. UTEC Jamaica is, of course, not without its challenges, and he presented that in its delivery of credit accumulation and transfer system, there is the need for a robust student management system. There needs to be updates and harmonizing of systems in support of CATS, among other areas. It is to be noted that the future plans of the University of Technology includes a priority to implement a credit banking policy, review updates and harmonize all relating policies supporting a credit accumulation and transfer system. He pointed out that there needs to be greater promotion for the benefits of CATS to the staff within the institution, and also to develop and promote short courses, micro-credentials for its external clients. And these were just some of the future plans that were presented for the University of Technology, Jamaica. Dr. Johnson also graced us with several recommendations, and these include the increase in forums to discuss CATS, a registry to store and retrieve information on credentials, and there needs to be a review of the 7-year recency policy as it relates to the award and recognition of credentials. And he elaborated and clarified that in some instances, it may be that the recency standard would be increased depending on the program, and in some it could be lessened. And of course, he articulated that there needs to be active research and tracking of credit accumulation and transfer systems. Dr. Nanibala Paul from the Northern Caribbean University was our third and final presenter. And she pointed out and recognizes that learners experience much difficulty in efficiently transferring credits across institutions. And this can be resolved based on her presentation in the development of articulation agreements and collaboration among education institutions. Some of the best practices that she highlights that she has recognized during her career is the development of other credit accumulation and transfer systems, the establishment of memorandums of understandings between entities, stakeholder groups, and so on. There should be, or the practice of having regular meetings within academic units to plan and update institutions on the practices of credit accumulation and transfer, and ensuring that ensuring that staff within programs is informed of course and credit mapping information as it relates to credit accumulation and transfer. Dr. Paul also looked at international practices, and these included regions in the USA and India. And she highlighted that NCU has well-established credit transfer systems as well as flexible learning pathways to facilitate students' matriculation, progression, and completion of programs of study. Some of the future plans of the Northern Caribbean University include working on prior learning and experience policy to promote stackable micro-credentials for both entry and matriculation into programs, the inclusion of credit transfer components to be well presented on their website, and to revise the automated system for processing credit transfer within a central database. She also promoted the survey and experience of transfer students to improve the system and learners and their experiences within the institution. So these are just some of the future plans of the Northern Caribbean University. As it relates to the general presentations made, the session culminated into very alive discussions coming from the chat, and the chat came alive as attendees, which at a point was up to 78 at its highest, who posed questions generally and to specific presenters in some instance. And these discussions and interactions serve to enrich general discussions of the session. I want to highlight that our participants were engaging and raise questions and raise questions and presented their feedback quite amicably on the topic at hand. All right, so thank you, and that ends my summary of today's session.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Thompson. And I think it is for me then really to say thanks to all of you, to all the presenters, to J-TEC for the opportunity to collaborate, and for all of you for logging in, and even for those who've been listening, because this is being recorded, and I know that some of you will be listening to this as a delayed recording. So we are just so happy to have you. Continue to follow the work that we do, not only here at CARICAD, but also at J-TEC. You can easily find us via the World Wide Web. And I see all the thanks in the chat. I'm so happy that you found this webinar very insightful, useful. And we intend to hopefully continue that dialogue and to collaborate with J-TEC in the future as we continue to build our tertiary education systems, not only in Jamaica, but across the Caribbean. Thanks to those who joined from around the region as well. We have so much to learn from each other as we continue to work towards one CARICOM. So on behalf of all the stakeholders here, we want to say, have a good rest of the afternoon and all the best.